Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Larsen-Skauge from the University of Bergen, to provide an update on the modeling of immiscible and miscible WAG flood. So please take it away, Dr. Skauge.
Thank you. So we see if we can share my presentation. Okay. Could you please confirm that you see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. My name is Larsen-Skauge. I'm professor at the University of Bergen in Bergen, Norway. I hold the chair in energy simulation chair in enhanced oil recovery. And this presentation will be an update on modeling of immiscible and miscible WAG. So we started with the objective here. It's to develop robust WAG models that includes best choice of fluid flow functions, phase trapping, but also transition to miscibility, compositional effects, and also handles our knowledge of viscous instability, crossflow, and field heterogeneity. An additional objective is to define key factors which have significant impact on the WAG potential forecasting. So more detail description is here. We want to close the gap between current models, which is either handling immiscible WAG or miscible WAG, by constructing a physical and empirical based WAG model that includes these topics here, like best choice of fluid flow functions, saturation dependency of fluid flows, flow functions, phase trapping, transition towards miscibility, and composition effect, including changes in IFTs. So one of the topics that we have been working on has been the transition of immiscible to miscible, and both on WAG but also on gas injection in particular, of course. So building a complete theory, including three-phase flow in systems of any wettability, a consistent theory of the immiscible to miscible transition, and analytical models based on post-scale physics. So we are transferring the post-scale physics to analytical function we could use in the simulator. So if you go back to this basic immiscible WAG approach, then we are looking at hysteresis. And why are we looking at hysteresis in relative permeability? Well, it's shown on the graph here. So I'll put up, see if I can, I have a laser pointer here. So I hope you can see the laser pointer. So we have the relative permeability of gas here and versus gas saturation. And I'm just illustrating it by drainage, meaning increasing gas saturation, and imbibition, where the water injection has started in the WAG cycle and we are reducing the gas saturation. And we see there's a hysteresis in the relative permeability. And the fact that there's a hysteresis is coupled that phase could be then described by a mobile part of the phase and a trapped part of the phase. And the trapped phase is then not contributing to mobility. So if I'm try to find for instance, the gas phase mobility, I can find that from the trapped gas, the gas actually at any actual gas saturation, if I include also a constant here, which is giving me a relationship for the trapped gas, which is shown here on the trapped phase relationship here, that inverse of trapped gas and inverse of maximum gas saturation, that's where you're turning the process from gas injection to water injection, is equal to constant, often called land constant, because that was the origin of these sources of non-wetting phase trapping. And we use that for gas. We can use it also for water. And we see that this quantity of this trapped gas is important to have the relationship for the trapped gas over the whole saturation range. We also see that trapped gas has an impact on residual oil saturation. So if you compare to water flood residual, minus the constant times the trapped gas, we find that, and this constant K is always between 0 and 1, so it's a positive quantity. That means three-phase residual oil saturation is usually lower than the water flood residual. So real-time hysteresis is important for oscillating phase saturation occurring during WAG. But in addition to that, history dependency also becomes important. So if I'm looking at the complexity of the three-phase relative permeability just from the fluid flow functions, we have the two, they all dependent on two saturations. So two saturations is able to describe it because the sum of the three saturations is equal to 1. So, but the trapped gas saturation has to be known individually for each of the three phases. But in addition to the trap phases and the total phase saturation, two other quantities comes in, and that's the hysteresis, a quantity that controls the hysteresis of the phase. But also, we have to know the prior history, how we got to this saturation. So the prior saturation history becomes very important. It's shown here on the function at the lower part, where we see that the gas relative permeability in the drainage process here is calculated from two quantities and a constant, meaning the start of the process, the gas saturation start, and the water saturation start, plus a constant, which are showing the dependency on the water saturation. So thereby we see that the importance of the saturation part, how you got there in the saturation space, is quite important. All phases can be a function of several phase saturations, and trapped phases are very important to govern the whole process. We have illustrated this by two figures here. The first one is showing immiscible case, where we have a gas saturation on the vertical axis here, and we have the water corner, gas corner, and oil corner as shown here. Then if you do a gas injection, we will move towards the gas corner, and if we do a water cycle, we will move towards the water corner again, so we go zigzag. But on the vertical axis here, we see that the relative permeability to gas, how it's diminishing as we are moving into the ternary three-phase space. But in this, what we see when we go near-miscible is that you can get this dual displacement that is shown up to the upper right, where the gas is displacing both oil and water simultaneously. So this brings us over to next step, is to look at the post-scale physics of these processes. If here we have a kind of unusual plot. It's on the horizontal axis, it's actually wettability. So cosinus to the contact angle of oil water is equal to 1, meaning water wet state. And on the opposite side, it's -1. That means it's an oil wet state. And in between here, we have 0, so that means it's neutral. And on the vertical scale, we can have a relationship for a cosinus theta for gas water or gas oil. But in this case, we use gas water. And we have illustrated the upper green line as the miscible case. And we see that we have a larger slope of cosinus theta for gas water when we go towards miscibility due to the changes in the interface tensions. So if I'm staying here at the point A, which is weakly oil wet, because I have a cosinus theta oil water equal to minus 0.5. And thereby, at this point, I have a positive cosinus theta gas water for the immiscible case. That means water is the more wetting compared to gas, while when it goes negative, it turns around. So for the near-miscible case, gas becomes more wetting than water. So we're changing the order. And does that have any impact? Well, let's see. If I'm continuing using this plot here, and then I'm comparing the immiscible case, then in the immiscible case, if I'm expanding the gas, I displace water mostly. So water will be displaced here, and after displacing the water, I will displace oil. But when I go to near-miscible, then gas is in the middle here. It's more wetting than the water, and under these oil wet pores. And we see that if gas expands, it will displace both oil and water. Shown with this Turner diagram lower part here, where we see that we have a curved shape of the isotherm, and I see the pathway of the pathway, and gas is displacing both oil and water. Okay, so what's the learning from these things? Okay, post-scale physics have been used to estimate the three-phase relationship for change in wetting order, and helps as guide for three-phase relations in the transition from immiscible to miscible WAG. Post-scale physics will be integrated with empirical relationship into a more consistent WAG model for all conditions. The miscible WAG model described in these studies, along with post-scale physics, guides the consequences of compositional effect, the interface changes in interface tensions, and will together constitute a complete WAG model covering all cases from immiscible to miscible. Just to give an example of that is, what makes a near-miscible WAG process complex? Well, it has two distinct features. It's the mass transfer, stripping, swelling effects, and we have, which also leads to that we can calculate the interface tensions at the conditions we have of the mass transfer. Then we have a direct interface tension effect, which changes the flow functions, also the residual oil saturation, and maybe fill flow behavior. And that occurs with at low interface tensions. So we have tried out a simulation of these issues, and here is just an illustration of saying, okay, we have compositional effect, high compositional effect, low compositional effect, and on the vertical axis we have then low IFT effects and high IFT effects. And we're also looking at comparing these, combining these two mechanisms at the same time. So I'm moving forward here to some simulation we did on an extremely fine grid. So we're using one single grid block more or less. It's 50 meter by 10 in a heterogeneous model. So we have a very strong local heterogeneity, and the permeability is ranging from 20 Darcy down to millidarcy, a few millidarcy. And in this model then we are running the compositional aspect and comparing this effect of compositional change and IFT changes. And here we've done just one case of saying continuous effect only having compositional effect. And we're looking inside at about 1 pore volume injected. And we see that we have a very kind of heterogeneous saturation picture. And the dark blue is the very efficient, where the oil saturation is close to 0 or very low. And we see that the dark blue area is extended quite a bit more if we have continuous process where we have both compositional effect and IFTs effect simultaneously. So we're using a Coates type of correlation for how to move towards miscibility. And it has an onset of onset of interfacial tension. So here we have changed it from 10 to 5 to 3 millinewton per meter or dynes per centimeter, or we have no effect at all. And we see if you have a strong effect here, we see a change here that its affects recovery in the order of up to 4%. So remarks here is that we have reviewed this the process and mechanism operating in near-miscible CO2 WAG, and it goes for any near-miscible processes. Using the mechanism of compositional effects and also the IFTs effect, and isolate them and join them together. And we find that the interfacial tension effects are invisible more or less in 1D slim tube, and very weak in continuous CO2 injection in 2D heterogeneous system. But if you go to WAG processes, it becomes very important. And then the IFT influence has a strong impact on the extensive recovery we see from preferential routes, meaning bypassed oil by viscous crossflow. So there's a strong influence of the IFTs here. Last part of my talk will be on some comments about upscaling. We had a very good situation with discussion with Dennis Schuster, and we had one student coming over from Dennis' group, Victor Rios, that has done an excellent work on upscaling. So he had already been working a lot on upscaling, and we were willing to go into upscaling of these WAG processes. So here's just an example of gas or near-miscible gas injection. So we have from a very fine grid here up on the left side upper corner, which is 5 by 5 meter. And then we go to the core scale of 100 by 100 meters, so more like reservoir scale. If we do a gas displacement here, we see that we get a more refined finger pattern on the 5 by 5 meter grid cells. But if we coarsen this grid cells up to 100 by 100, we get a more homogeneous front, and it's a more optimistic effect of the gas saturation. So this leads to that the coarser the model, the more optimistic it becomes. So if you want a very positive results, do a coarse model. But if you want it closer to the true model, you have to go with the fine grid. And we believe that the 5 by 5 is representing the correct physical processes better. So the objective is then to find a coarse model which can mimic the 5 by 5 grid model. So the approach is here to generate fine and coarse scale models. The first step is to generate an alternative fluid model representing the immiscible behavior. So we are tuning on the fine grid model, the 5 by 5 model, with fluid description to simplify it and pseudorize the component for the description of this fine grid model and still maintain the same saturation behavior. Then we work on Pseudorail pumps in the coarse model with these alternative fluid. And by that approach, we are then able then to do an upscaling. And we see here with the dashed line here, which is an upscale version of on the coarse grid, that we are able to get the same production profile as we do for the fine grid model. And the coarse model becomes about 150 times faster. So we are onto this for different cases, and there's a lot to be done, but we are onto this in a very good way. So coarser model tend to represent optimistic oil production for miscible gas injection, and also we've seen similar results for the WAG process. The main reason relates to the difficulty in representing unstable flow and channeling on the coastal scale. So thereby, by changing the fluid properties and also the fluid model, and then also using a pseudo-relative permeability approach, we are able then to move close to this behavior of the fine grid model. So more representative gas saturation profiles in coarse model. And we are able to modifying the pseudo-relative permeability in order to better reproduce production curves using coarse scale simulation models. So by this, conclusion is already covered by the remarks. The way forward is that we have significant progress in coupling three-phase relative permeability flow models and consistent theory of immiscible to miscible transitions. There's a need to translate post-scale physics to analytical functions ready to be implemented in simulators. The complete WAG model will be gradually developed and tested in the next coming years. So we are looking forward to that. That ends my presentation. I've also included some recent papers on WAG's mechanistic WAG studies and upscaling. So therefore, each, if somebody is interested in that, these are from the 2 last years. And by that, I come to the acknowledgement. We acknowledge the support from our sponsors, and just as important, I will also acknowledge all the co-workers working on this issue. Among others, 2 other tiers, Eric McKay and Dennis Schuster. So thank you very much.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Arne-Skauge. We have quite a few questions here. From Dr. Iraj Ershagi, University of Southern California. The question is, how does the actual rock permeability affect the critical gas saturation? Is that something you consider?
Yeah, the critical gas saturation is not that so important as the trapped gas. And trapped gas has a dependency on the rock properties, and also very much on the aspect ratio. The changes of big pores to small pores is affecting and the more contrast we have in the heterogeneity in the media, the higher the trapped gas seems to be. But there's also a trapped gas relationship difference between 2-phase and 3 phases. And in 3 phases, the trapped gas saturation, for instance, is lower than in 2 phases, somewhat lower. But the critical gas saturation is the onset of the mobility of gas, and that's usually a few % only. But it has some variations with permeability and rock properties, but it's a long story to go into that. So
okay, sure. Next question is from Dao Yong Yang. As of each WAG cycle, how will the three-phase permeability be determined from the measured isoperm on your ternary diagram?
Well, what we do is the opposite. We are generating from usually from experiments. We have relative permeability data for three-phase flow. So it's a WAG cyclic experiment or continuous injection of gas injection followed with water, and water injection, alternative water injection followed with gas. And thereby we get the trapped gas saturation, but we also get relationship on the relative permeability. And we can use this functionality into concluding on the impact of hysteresis, but also we can study it further and look at how it's represented in a ternary diagram. But the ternary diagram, as we have history-dependent flow functions, will vary all the time. So it's not constant, because you have to keep the path. Any point in the ternary diagram will have the relative permeability properties in that point will depend on how you got there. And that means you have to know your processes as you go there. These isoperms are just representative for that process at the current saturation, and may vary with the hysteresis and history in a real simulation issue.
Okay.
Maybe not the answer you wanted, but that's what you got.
Okay, good. One question from Christine Meyer. Thank you for your interesting talk. Could you elaborate more on how you are computing the pseudo-Rail perms for the upscaled models? How do they differ from the input Rail perms?
Oh, they may differ quite a bit, and what we do is just do it by a straightforward history matching. So we do a history matching on towards the production profile. But what we've done one step earlier is that we have simplified the fluid description for the process, and we do that on the fine grid model, and make the fluid as simple as possible, but still describing the same type of instabilities and fingers being formed, but doing with it as simple fluid as possible. Then we go to the next step, course model. Using that fluid description, we will have a mismatch, and then we are tuning until we get the match with the production. And this relative permeability varies quite a bit from what's the conventional type of relative permeability we had as an input.
Okay. One question from Wen Yu Xu is, in addition to saturation, does bubble size plays a significant role? Because bubble size may differ from pore size.
Sorry, that this became a bit weak. So could you repeat it?
In addition to saturation,
Yeah.
does bubble size plays a significant role? Because bubble size may differ from pore size.
Bubble size?
Right.
Yeah, no. Well, I think you may be thinking of either discontinuous gas or more like a foam process. But this case, we are looking at continuous gas. But of course, when gas is coming out of solution, it's bubbles, and these bubbles has to coalesce into a continuous phase in order to be transported. So we see the buoyancy forces is not working on the single pore or droplet of gas, but as soon as you have coalescence and you get a ganglia of gas, it's able to move both with the viscous gradient and also with the buoyancy forces. So we include this issue, but yeah, maybe not as detailed as you wanted. So there's still maybe things to optimize there, definitely.
Oh, okay. One question from Radu Buzia. Thanks for the presentation, Dr. Arne. I would be curious if you have temperature and stress applied to your simulations. In oil sands Alberta, we do see some left behind oil from the SAG-D on core cut after the process was applied. Are you planning to look at some of these applications?
Unfortunately not. We are not at that stage where we have done these type of analysis. So maybe later when we have this model completed, so then we can attack this problem. But I haven't been looking at that currently.
Okay, perhaps we should find some more sponsors, right?
Yeah.
One question now from Gillian Pickup. I believe he's from Heriot University. Thanks for stating that. How portable are the pseudos for the miscible WAG upscaling?
Well, we have seen it. We've tested that out by extending the models and so on. And we see it's quite portable. So within the tests we've done, we've seen it's successful with the pseudos that we have found. But of course, there's limited amount of studies we've done, and there could be some surprises in the larger 3D models that we haven't been attacking yet. So definitely, I cannot generalize, but what we've seen so far is promising.
Okay. From my associate, or our associate, Vijay Srivastava of Computer Modeling Group, should you be using a numerical dispersion reducing method for larger grids so that you can distinguish between physical results?
Yes, definitely. So that's something that we are absolutely considering, yes.
Okay. From Takeswar Kumar, how do you correlate the field rel perms with a lab rel perm for use in the simulation model?
Okay, we use the input data from lab, and what we end up with, which is an upscaled version, is pseudo rel perms, which are very different, but are able then to match the breakthroughs and the production fairly well. So we have a match comparing the fine grid model and the coarse grid model, but and the pseudos are seems to be quite robust so far, as we've tested, but they are quite different. So I regret that I didn't bring up a case where I could show you the pseudos we generate, and but they are generally like also for water oil cases, we see that the pseudos come with a very strange shape compared to conventional type lab relative permeabilities.
Okay, one last question before we move on to the next presenter. Also, again, from Dr. Iraj Ursagi from University of Southern California. You showed the case for heterogeneous system. Yeah. Where in the modeling you are including the permeability dependency of trapped gas? My concern is that if and when you have natural fractures.
Yeah, that's I agree that too. But that's a topic that we haven't been looking into in fractal system. But we have looked into hyperbombal channels, but not specifically in a more fractal system. So there's definitely near-well issue that should be addressed more, but that comes on a later stage also.
Okay, well, that concludes Dr. Arne Skauge's talk. Thank you again, and we would like to invite the next